Shalom Aleichem and welcome everyone as we are preparing for Shabbat, Parashat Beshalach, Shabbat Shirah. We're coming to a very, very important parasha. Every parasha is important, but this parasha is Hashem really takes the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, separating us nation from nation and creating the Jewish people. And as we are leaving, and the Egyptians, the Mitzrayim, are chasing after us, and we are scared. The Jewish people are scared. We don't know what to do. Which way to go? There's no real options. Go into the water, go into the desert. What to do? The Mitzrayim are coming. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells the people, Vayomer Moshe el ha'am al tira'u. Don't be scared. Hityatzevu ur'u et Yeshuat Hashem. Stand fast and see Hashem saving us. So you have 600,000 men, right, over the age of 20 that left Mitzrayim, are standing as the Egyptians are coming closer to them. And Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, don't do anything. Just stand still and Hashem will take care of it. Now, someone is coming towards you with a sword, a spear, a knife. What are you supposed to do? Defend yourself, right? And Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, don't do anything. The Ibn Ezra says, you know why? You know why Moshe Rabbeinu told them that? More so, Ibn Ezra says. He says that because they would have no way were able to fight their Mitzrayim. The Jews were slaves. Who were their masters? Who beat them up? Who told them what to do? The Egyptians, these same Egyptians that are coming to fight them now. They were mentally trained to be submissive and listen to these masters. There was no way they can pick up a sword and fight. That's why, in the end of the day, who came into Eretz Canaan to fight the Canaanim? The people who left Mitzrayim or their children? Their children. Not the people who left Mitzrayim. The people who left Mitzrayim, they were slaves. That slave mentality. They couldn't pick up a sword and fight. They didn't know what it means. So that's why the Ibn Ezra says, way back in Parashat Shemot, the Ibn Ezra says that's the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu grew up where? In Paro's palace. Why? To give him the confidence, to give him the royal mentality that he can stand up, he can fight, he can speak. Because otherwise, he would have been a slave like everyone else. Well, not really a Shevet Levi, but he may not have been able to stand up against Paro the way he did. That's why he was put in the royal house. This is a very big yesod if you think about it. They mean the training that people get, conditioning that people get, can stay with them forever. Rav Mordechai Haminer, he says this idea of Moshe Rabbeinu growing up in Paro's palace, this idea of the Jews not being able to fight the Mitzrayim, he said it applies in chinuch. It applies in educating our children. He says, imagine you tell a child, you're not smart. You ignore them. You tell them, all these words that you have in every language to put down people. How is he going to grow up? What's going to be his self-esteem? What's going to be his self-confidence? He's not going to have any. There was a great tzaddik, Har Yisrael Zev Gustman. He was a huge Talmud Chacham. He sat as a dayan in the Beit Din of Rav Chaim Ozer Grodensky. He was a huge tzaddik. And he went through World War II. And after the war, he survived and he came to Eretz Yisrael. And when he was in Eretz Yisrael, he met the Stipler Gaon. And the Stipler Gaon asked him, what's his name? He said, Rav Gustman. He said, Rav Gustman, are you related to the Rav Gustman who used to sit as a dayan in Rav Chaim Ozer Grodensky's Beis Din? He says, yeah, that's me. He says, it's you. We want to put you on the dayan now. Come, we'll make you a dayan. He says, no. Yeshiva after yeshiva came to him and said, we'll make you Rosh Yeshiva, we'll make you Mashgiach. Any job you want in the yeshiva, we want you there. And he said no. And they asked him, why not? He says, to be a dayan, to be a judge, to be a Rosh Yeshiva, you have to have dignity. You have to have confidence. And after what the Nazis in Machshamam did to me, he said, I lost my dignity. I lost my self-respect. I lost my self-confidence. I cannot be a Rosh Yeshiva. I cannot be a dayan. I don't have that ability anymore to do that. They took that away from me. That self-esteem, that self-confidence. Here in the Peninim al Torah, he shares a story from Chaim Kanevsky. Chaim Kanevsky remembers that the Chazon Ish spent a few weeks in Tzefat. And he was davening in his apartment where he was staying at. And one morning he told everybody who came to daven with him that instead of davening in the apartment where it was spacious, they were going to daven on the balcony near outside the apartment. So people started to say, why? So the Chazon Ish said, there's a boy who fell asleep on the couch in his pajamas. If we daven here and he wakes up, how embarrassed he's going to be that he's sleeping in his pajamas and people are davening in the same room. I'd rather daven on the balcony where there's not enough space for everybody, but not embarrass someone. Not embarrass someone. The Rosh Yeshiva of Parat Yosef, Harav Yehuda Adas Shlita, Harav Yehuda Adas, he says, he once asked a child, a young boy, it's coming Yom Kippur. What are you thinking about? What do you want to do tshuva for? And he says, I have to do a lot of tshuva. He says, why? He says, I'm a Rasha. I'm the worst of the worst. This kid's like 10 years old. And he's saying, I'm the worst of the worst. This terrible person. So the Rosh Yeshiva asks him, why do you say such a thing? He says, because my father always tells me this. My father always tells me I'm the worst of the worst, so that's what I'm thinking. The Rosh Yeshiva, he says, he was once walking down the street in Eretz Yisrael, and he hears a woman screaming out of the apartment, and she's screaming to her child, and she's saying to this child, what will be with you? You're a Rasha. You're worthless. And he sees it's a 5-year-old boy that she's screaming at. He couldn't believe it. Imagine you saying such things to a 5-year-old boy. What's going to be? You know, Lahavdil, there's a famous person in the world. You might have heard of him, Thomas Edison. Right? Thomas Edison. The light bulbs. He invented the light bulbs. Right? Famous man. Took him over 2,000 tries to make the light bulb. When someone told him, don't you feel like you wasted so much time making light bulbs? He said, no, I figured out 2,000 ways of not to make a light bulb, and then I finally found the right way. Because it takes time and effort to make something. But when he was a child, the story goes, now the facts of the story is a little bit off, but the truth is still there. The concept of the idea of the story is true. He was sent home with a letter from school as a young boy. And he told his mother, my teacher gave me this letter. What does it say? The mother reads the letter, and she tells her son, your teacher wrote, your son is a genius. This school is too small for him and doesn't have any good enough teachers to train him. Please keep him home and teach him. What happens? He says, that's what happened. My mother kept me at home, and he became an inventor. The whole world today, without Thomas Edison, you won't have light the way we have light. And when his mother died, and he was emptying out the house, he found in the closet the letter that the teacher sent, that his mother read to him. And this time he read it for himself. And the letter said, your son is mentally deficient. It's not completely there. We cannot let him back to school. He is expelled. And instead of saying that, the mother switched it to say that you're a genius. And he said, my mother took a mentally deficient child and turned him into the genius of the century by just giving him self-confidence, giving him his self-esteem. Just a few words can change everything. Here in the Peninim al Torah, he ends off with a story. There was a Sheva Brachot of a young man. He was getting married. He got married. He was during the Sheva Brachot week. And the grandfather got up to speak. And the grandfather says, I want to tell you about something that happened in Europe when I was a little boy. We had a cheder. We had a yeshiva. And there was a young man in the yeshiva, a young boy in the yeshiva, a young kid. And he used to make pranks and jokes and lots of trouble. And the teachers would complain. And the parents were told over and over again. And one day, during Shaharit, it was a Thursday morning. And they came to open the Aron HaKodesh. And they opened the Aron, and out jumps a goat. Someone put a goat inside the Aron HaKodesh. It didn't take long for anyone to figure out that it was this little troublemaker who put the goat inside. And that was it. That was the final straw. They sent him home and they told him that this kid is expelled from yeshiva. And the parents gave up hope we're going to fight. There's a goat in the Aron HaKodesh. There's nothing to even say. And this little boy said, I will not let this happen until you take me to Din Torah. I want to go to Bet Din. I want to take the principal to Bet Din. No one wants to kick me out. So he goes to Bet Din the next day. This little boy and the head of the yeshiva, the principal, the menahel. And the Dayan says to the little boy, what do you want to say? And the little boy says, just because I put a goat into the Aron HaKodesh, is that reason to kick me out of yeshiva? They say, why not? It's a terrible thing. He says, I'll tell you why not. Because if you kick me out of yeshiva, there's no other yeshiva in this city. There's only one cheder, one yeshiva. What's going to be with me? I'm not going to get a Jewish education. If I don't get a Jewish education, I'm not going to stay Jewish. If I'm not going to stay Jewish, then my children are not going to be Jewish. And my children, no one's going to be Jewish. Because you're kicking me out of yeshiva because I put a goat in the Aron. And at that moment, the Menahel said, I agree to him. We're going to take him back. And we're going to keep him in the yeshiva, but he's got to toe the line. He can't misbehave anymore. And he changed his life around. So this grandfather who is saying over the story says at the end, he says, just to let you know, I was that little boy. And Baruch Hashem, I was able to stay in yeshiva. And that's how you, my grandson, are able to get married to a fine Jewish girl and to raise a Jewish family. But the idea is here that you can't break a person's self-esteem. Each one of us, even if you're children, you have the ability to build each other up. Right? You have a brother, you have a sister. And sometimes we want to put them down. Sometimes we want to say things that are not so great. But we have the ability that because if we don't, it's very dangerous. The Jews were standing there, unable to fight for their lives because they had slave mentality. Yes? You had a question?
I have 2 stories.
2 stories. Can we take the stories at the end?
Yeah.
Okay. You remember them. Remember the stories.
Right.
All right. Let's move on to our next lesson on this week's Parashat. Okay, Rabotai, we have this week's Parashat, Az Yashir. We have Paro walking into the Yam Suf. He's walking into the Nile. Now, what happens? Think about this. Paro sees 10 makot, one after the other. He sees the sea split. And he sees it split for the Jews. The Jews walk in, Nachshon ben Amidal goes in, the sea splits, everyone walks through, and Paro runs after. Paro, don't you know this is miracles? Don't you know Hashem is doing this for the Jews? Why are you running into the water? So the Ramban, in his Perush and Humash, says, you know why Paro went in? That night, Hashem made a very big wind the whole night. There was a huge wind coming. And Paro and all his advisors said, you know why the sea split? Because of the wind. And if it's because of the wind, then we also can go in. Really? Really? You know all the miracles were happening. You know you never saw wind open the sea. So you saw wind tonight, so you think? Why is that? Why did Paro think that? Doesn't he see the obvious? Doesn't he know that this is not nature, but is rather a miracle? We said this story over many times, but the story is a classic, and then from there we'll bring up the next piece. They used to tell a story of a man who was a drunkard, shikar, always getting drunk. He used to drink wine, just get drunk all the time. His family was so embarrassed about him. They were so embarrassed. They didn't know what to do with him. So they tell him, listen, we understand that you want to drink, but you're embarrassing us. At least don't drink by yourself. Drink with somebody else. This way, you guys can watch yourselves. And this way they were hoping he would drink less. So this man said, you know what? You have my word. I will never again drink by myself. I will always drink with somebody else. A few days passed. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. He wakes up and he wants to drink some wine. But what to do? There's nobody around. So he goes out to the street. He takes a little table with him, takes 2 cups, and he takes his bottle of wine. He's looking on the street, nobody's walking. And then he says to himself, why am I waiting like this? If the guy comes now, I'm going to have to pour the wine, set the table. You know what? Let me set everything. He sets the table, puts the 2 cups, says, well, I'm waiting anyway. Let me pour the wine. He pours the wine in 2 cups, and now he's waiting. He's looking, nobody's coming. What to do? And all of a sudden, a fly starts to fly. And he sees the fly, lands right on the cup. He says, now I have somebody to drink with. L'chaim. He takes his cup and he drinks it. And then he looks down and he sees the fly didn't touch the wine. Nothing came. He says, you're not drinking that? It's okay. I'll take it too. And he drinks the second cup as well. Now, did he for a moment really think that fly counted as a person? Is that fly counted as company? No. But rather what? He wanted it. He really wanted to drink it. And so, he came up with an excuse to. Paro knows the miracles. Paro knows everything. But Paro wants to believe it's not a miracle so he can continue to go after. It's not just Paro. A lot of us are this way too. Sometimes the facts are staring us in the face. Don't do this. Not good for you. Don't go there. But we want to believe it's okay. So we'll rationalize and come up with ideas and come up with all sorts of ways. Okay? And then we go and we do it and we realize, oops, well, what a big mistake. We shouldn't have done it. Why? Because we wanted to believe that. Right? So we went and we did it. So, if Paro, after all these makot, Paro, after all this, he doesn't believe, he doesn't understand that it's miracles, how about us? How do we change? How do we, who saw so much, after 9/11, the Twin Towers fell, everybody said, the world is never going to be the same. Everything's going to change. Nothing changed. What? How many years later? Everybody's going on the same way. Everyone's going to do the same thing. You meet people who went through a miracle, who survived. Maybe the first week, 2 3 weeks, first year maybe. And afterwards, life goes back. So how do you keep it? Paro obviously couldn't. Many people can't. What's the secret to real change? The Navi tells us a story. There was a Navi who came to Bet El, and he found Yeravam ben Navat offering sacrifices on the altar, on the golden calf. Remember Yeravam ben Navat? He split from the southern kingdom. He put up 2 golden calves. He said, this was your gods. And Yeravam himself, who was a huge Talmid Chacham beforehand, was serving them. This Navi comes, and he tells him that a son would be born to the house of David by the name of Yoshiyahu, and who would take all the Kohanim of the Baal, of the Avodah Zarah, and burned them. And burned Yeravam himself. And as a proof to his nevuah, he said the mizbeach that he was going to bring up, these Karbanot Avodah Zarah, was going to split. What does Yeravam do at this moment? Yeravam screams to his servants, catch him, seize him, take him. What happens to Yeravam when he does that? His hand becomes stiff. Frozen. Can't move it. So what does Yeravam say to this Navi? He says, daven for me. He says, Chal na et penei Hashem Elokecha v'hitpalel ba'adi v'toshav yadi elai. And the Navi davens for him. And what does it say? V'tashav yad hamelech elav v'tehi kevarishona. And his hand became back as it was originally. And Rashi says, what does it mean, v'tehi kevarishona? That Yeravam went right back to serving Avodah Zarah. Yeah. He just saw miracle after miracle. The Mizbeach split. His hand got frozen. He sees the Navi telling him, you're doing something wrong. He says to the Navi, daven for me to fix my hand. He does. And he goes back to serving Avodah Zarah. Instantaneously. Not even a few minutes later. Right away. How? How does this happen?
What was placed before?
The Midrash tells us that Yoshiyahu made a huge Baal Tshuva movement. And he sent Talmidei Chachamim from house to house to search for Avodah Zarah and destroy them. And yet people were able to keep Avodah Zarah inside their houses. How did it happen? What does the Midrash say? When they came in to search, they opened their doors to allow them to search. And they couldn't find any. And then when they left, they closed the doors. The Avodah Zarah was hidden on the door. So when they opened the door, they couldn't see the Avodah Zarah anymore. So the Talmidei Chacham were looking everywhere. No. And then, when they closed the door and they left, the Avodah Zarah was back in the house. Harav Galinsky, Yaakov Galinsky, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, says, he says, when I learned this Midrash, it made me think. This is exactly how everybody acts. We go to shul, we go to the shiur, we go to the lecture, and you hear, they're giving you musar, everything's great. We open our hearts, the doors are open. But then as soon as we leave, we shut the doors, and everything goes back to regular. We're not keeping those doors open. Listen to what Rabbeinu Yonah says in Pirkei Avot. Im ha'adam lo'orer nafsho, ma yo'lehu ha'musarim. He says, if a person doesn't wake himself up, all the musar, all the miracles, anything that happens, anything that shows him the right way, is going to do nothing for him. Ki al pi shenichnasim belibo b'yom shamo yishakechem ha'yetzer v'ayverem belibo. The yetzer hara will make him forget it immediately. The point is, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's fighting against Amalek, what does he do? He picks up his hands. What? His hands make us win? So the Mishnah asks this question, right? The Mishnah says, does it make us win or lose? Right, to tell us, when they saw Moshe's hands up into Shemaim, they were supposed to understand that Hashem is there. And when Hashem is there, they were winning. So 1 second. When Moshe Rabbeinu put his hands down for a second, they started losing. What happened? Because they already forgot about Hashem. That quick. That quick. If Moshe Rabbeinu's hands to show them that Hashem is there, they should remember that the whole time. Moshe Rabbeinu should pick his hands up for 5 minutes, and that's it. But what happens? The minute Moshe Rabbeinu puts his hands down, they all forget about Hashem. Yaakov Galinsky says this is our job, is to keep the doors open, to keep our hands up, to keep remembering that there's a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Keep remembering the miracles. Keep remembering everything that happened in life. And not to let it get stale. Not to let it, not just to open and then close the door. But rather keep those doors open. Keep the channels to HaKadosh Baruch Hu open. That's the idea. Like it says in the Parashat, Shiviti Hashem li'negdei tamid. Keep Hashem in front of you always. You have to know Him in all ways. Why? Because the minute you forget about Hashem, finish. You can fall right down. It's all over. And instantaneously. Just like Paro didn't remember the miracles. Just like the people, so Moshe's hands up, down. Just like Yeravam. Just like the people in the Tanya Yoshio. You need that connection open 24/7. You need good cell reception everywhere. Right? Everyone wants to get the good Verizon, whatever company that has good cell. Anywhere I go, I have cell reception. That's the type of reception you need with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At all times, to be connected. Let's move on to our final lesson from this week's Parashat. The Jews, Baruch Hashem, they come through the Yam Suf. They're all safe. The Mitzrayim are spit out and they're seen to be killed. They sing the song and they start to travel from the Yam Suf. And they go 3 days and they have no water. And then they come to Mara and they find bitter waters there. And they cry out to Hashem. And a whole miracle happens, and they sweeten the water. And then the next pasuk says, Vayavo Elima. They come to Elima. V'sham 12 enot mayim v'shiv'im temarim. V'yahanu sham al hamayim. And they come there, and there's so much to drink, and there's so much to eat. The Ibn Ezra says, how many days were they at Marah that they were complaining about the bitter waters? Ibn Ezra says they were there 1 day. And the next day, they already came to Elima. Says Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein Shlita. He says, what were they complaining about? Why were the Jews complaining? 1 more day, and everything they needed would be there. He says, Lamashal here, he says, people have limited vision. We don't see everything. He says, Lamashal, there's a man, comes home hungry, thirsty, tired, at the end of a hard day's work. He enters the house, he comes into the kitchen. The kitchen is spotless. There's no food on the stove. There's no smell of food. Nothing. As if his wife didn't walk into the kitchen all day. And he comes and he starts screaming. He says to her, all day I'm at work. And you couldn't cook me anything. You couldn't do anything for me. What's this? Nothing done in the kitchen. Where's my food? He's upset. And then, before he even finishes screaming, he walks through the kitchen and into the dining room, and sitting on the table is his favorite dinner already prepared. His wife cooked the food and cleaned it already, and he all the pots and dishes, and he sees nothing in the kitchen. He starts screaming. Meanwhile, his food's already sitting at his place. It's the same idea, he says, Rav Zilberstein. He says we act the same way towards Hashem. We complain to Hashem. Why this? Why that? What? Do you know what's coming tomorrow? Do you know what I have prepared for you? Who knows? We have limited vision. Our eyes can only see so much. There's a story told about a shamish of a certain Hasidic Rebbe. He was very poor. And he was a very good shamish. He helped them always. And so the Hasidim decided, you know what, Rebbe? We don't want you to see your shamish poor. We want to see him living a respectful life. He works for the Rebbe. So they collected a lot of money over a long time. And they gave it to the Rebbe. And they told the Rebbe, give it to your shamish so he can live respectfully. So the Rebbe took the money and he left it on his table in the office. And it was a big amount of money. And the shamish walks in and he sees a huge amount of money. And his Yetzer Hara gets the better of him. And he steals the money. And he walks out with the money. The Rebbe walks in, he sees the money gone, the only one person who came in. And he calls the Shamish, he says, what happened to this money? No, the Shamish admits it. He says, I stole it. The Rebbe says, the money is yours, but you're no longer working for me. I don't want you here. If he would have waited 5 minutes, what would have happened? The Rebbe would have given him the money. He would have got it b'kavod. He would have been still working for the Rebbe with all his kavod intact. But what happened? He wanted it early. He wanted it then. From this Marat to Elimah, we learn that you just have to wait a little bit. Right? The Gemara Chulin tells us that Yalta, the wife of Nachman, said that anything that is prohibited, assured by the Torah, there is heter somewhere for it. You just have to find it and wait for when it becomes mutar. But people, what we do with our limited vision, we think that we have to run, jump, and take it. There's a story that's set over by the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov had a student. His name was Yosela. Yosela was a big Hasid, but he had a big Yetzer Hara to steal. He always wanted to steal. He controlled himself. But one day, he found out that there was a Jewish girl who lived at the outskirts of town, and her parents recently died, and they were millionaires. And she lived alone with a security guard to watch the mansion, and he figured that would be an easy place to get. And so he targeted that house. And one night, he shows up at the house, and the security guard is sleeping in front of the mansion. So he simply sneaks in through the window. Within minutes, he finds the safe. He's a very good crook, a thief. Within minutes, he has the safe open and staring him in the face. Diamonds, gold, silver, jewelry of all kinds of all sorts. And he's about to take it and put it into his bag. And he says, you know what? He starts to think, he says, but the Gemara tells us, Mezonotav shel Adam. The mizonot of a person is parnasah, comes from Hashem, from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. Why am I stealing? And he had hurei tshuva, thoughts of tshuva, closed the safe, ran out the window, and came back home. The next morning, he goes back to his Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov calls him and says, Yosel, come here, come here. And the Yosel doesn't know what's going on. So the Baal Shem Tov saw Beruach HaKodesh where he was last night and what happened. And the Baal Shem Tov says to him, Yosel, I have a shidduch for you. You know Sarah the Yisoma, that girl who lost her parents? I think you would make a good shidduch. And he goes out with her. And with a limited amount of time, they get married. The whole mansion, the house, the jewelries, everything now was his. Not only was it his, he was married. The kavod, he was able to have children. Because he held himself back. He didn't give in to his yetzer to take it when it was asur, but rather he held himself back. You know, that's really the theme of this parasha. If you think about it, the Jews are at the Yam Suf, and the whole night they're waiting for the sea to split. And we always say that parnasah is kasher, it's hard to Kriyat Yam Suf. Shidduchim is as hard as Kriyat Yam Suf. The question is, what's so hard about Kriyat Yam Suf? What's so hard about it? Split it! Hashem can split anything. Hashem can make a miracle anytime. So what's so hard? So Chaim Shmulevis, the Chatzaddik the Bracha, Rosh Hashiva of the Mir, Rishol Belsky, the Chatzaddik the Bracha, Sheshiva Torah Vadat. They say, they come with two different approaches, but they say the same idea in the end. And the idea is, you know what was the hardest part of Kriyat Yam Suf? Was for the Jews to believe that it could happen. Hashem was waiting for the Jews to believe that Hashem can make the miracles. That's after they saw 10 other miracles. Okay? They saw 10 or 50 or 200, right? How many miracles they saw? And they needed to believe it. Nachshon went and showed that he believed it. And finally the water split. The same thing is with Parnasah. Hashem is ready to give it to you, Rabelsky says. It's right there for you. But people think they have to steal, cheat, lie to get it. People say, in my profession, if you don't steal, you're not going to make it. You can't. You have to do it. Hashem wants to give you the barakah. It's open, but you're stealing is closing it. The man itself. What was the man? That was the same idea with the man. This week's Parashat also. What's the man? The man is you can't keep it to tomorrow. Because Hashem takes care of everything you need. Every single day. The man falls from Shemayim. This is what it is, Rabotai. So we have to understand that it comes from Hashem. And if Hashem wants you to have it, you'll have it. You don't have to do all sorts of shtick for it. You have to do hishtaldut. You have to do something. Right? I believe the Chazon Ish said, what do you have to do? You have to do normal hishtaldut. What's expected? Whatever, you have to go to the store, open it up, you have to go to work and work, that's it. He says you're not allowed to do outlandish hishtaldut. You're not allowed to go out crazy to do things, to make things happen. You're not allowed. At that point, you don't have emunah in it anymore. You're not believing in Hashem. To do outlandish things is already past it. You got to go to college, that's what you have to do. You have to go to work, you have to do, but normal things, anything outside of normal, you don't have emunah in Hashem anymore. Some people, when it comes to shidduchim, and we'll end with this idea, but when some people come to shidduchim, they think they have to do all sorts of tricks. Trick this person, talk like this, make like this. Also when it comes to money, they think they have to trick, steal, lie, do this, do that. What? Gemara already told you. Hashem sets how much money you're going to make every Rosh Hashanah. Hashem's going to give you. And you're running around doing crazy things? Why? For who? For what? This is the idea that we have to come out with. Just to quickly review the 3 lessons that we have from this week's Parashat. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 1 was the Jews couldn't fight because they had slave mentality. Our responsibility is to train ourselves, our children, our family members to have self-esteem, to have self-confidence, to have a royal mentality, able to stand up for themselves, able to talk, able to take initiative, able to do things. Our second lesson on this week's Parashat was that in order for miracles to take effect, and for us to understand the musar, the rebuke, the shir, the lecture, we have to keep our doors open. We have to keep our hands up. We have to keep the connection to Hashem at all times. And what else did we learn? Our last lesson, which is all connected. The lesson that just wait for tomorrow. Just wait for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to help you. Daven to Hashem. Learn, stay connected to Hashem, and everything you're supposed to get will come. You have to do your responsibility, your job. But normally, don't go over crazy about it. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us a zechut that we should apply these lessons to our life at all times. And Hashem should give us Mashiach Tzidkeinu V'Yameinu Amen. We should always be able to see the Yeshuot, Nehamot, Refuot everybody needs. And we should be zocheh to many, many good years. Az Yashir Moshe, as they sang. Be'ezrat Hashem, Az, we're going to sing again in the future. With Mashiach Tzidkeinu. Shabbat Shalom. L'kulam.